Yo, greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the disturbing Wikipedia Iceberg by Arya Crown. Let's jump right back into it. Fetal Abduction. To start this one out, we have quite the, an extremely scary type of crime, with the article noting, quote, "Fetal abduction refers to the rare crime of child abduction by kidnapping of an at-term pregnant woman and extraction of her fetus through a crude cesarean section." Dr. Michael H. Stone and Dr. Gary Brucato have alternatively referred to this crime as fetus snatching or fetus abduction. Homicide expert Vernon J. Gerberth has used the term fetal kidnapping in the small number of reported cases. A few pregnant women and about half of their fetuses survive the assault and non-medically performed cesarean. Fetal abductions typically start with the lie that the perpetrator is pregnant and often coincide with a fear of losing a romantic partner. Then the perpetrator murders a pregnant woman to claim the fetus as her own, as a stillborn baby, or, if the fetus survives, as a newborn child. Fetal abduction is mostly perpetrated by women, usually after organized planning. The abductor may befriend the pregnant victim. In some cases, the abductor impersonates a pregnant woman, and later, a puerperal mother, using weight gain and a prosthesis to fake a pregnancy, and cutting of the reproductive organs to replicate injuries gained during birth. Some abductors then take the neonate to a hospital. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children spokesperson Kathy Nahirny stated in 2007, "Many times the abductor fakes a pregnancy, and when it is time to deliver the baby, must abduct someone else's child." Criminal motives include delusions of fulfilling a partner relationship, childbearing, and childbirth. Unquote. The article then goes on to show several examples of cases, from everywhere from 1987 all the way to 2022, with some details given about each one. We obviously can't read them all, but I'll go ahead and read a few of them here. Starting with, quote, "In Albuquerque, New Mexico, a 23-year-old Cindy Ray was 8 months pregnant when she was kidnapped at Kirtland Air Force Base outside a parental clinic. Darcy Pierce was 19 years old when she strangled the pregnant woman to death. She used her car keys to open Ray's womb, snatching the unharmed fetus. Amelia Monick survived, and Pierce was sentenced to 30 years to life for her crime. Then, in Addison, Illinois, 28-year-old Deborah Evans was murdered in her apartment. Jacqueline Annette Williams, also 28, her boyfriend Fidel Caffey, 22, and her cousin Laverne Ward, 24, went into Evans' home and shot her in the head. Ward was the ex-boyfriend of Evans. He had 3 children and was pregnant with a 4th. The murderers then proceeded to cut through her womb with scissors and remove the fetus. During the break-in, Evans' 10-year-old Samantha was stabbed in her sleep, while her other 2 children, 7-year-old Joshua and 2-year-old Jordan, were kidnapped, along with the fetus. Sadly, Joshua was then found dead in an alleyway the next day. The 3 murderers were caught with the surviving boy and the fetus, later named Elijah, and sentenced to life in prison. Then, in Quirot, Colombia, in April of 2004, a case was reported in which both the mother and the child survived. Aseneth Piedrahita extracted the baby boy of Sol Angelina Cartagena Bernal, 8 months pregnant. Reportedly, the perpetrator had limited but some medical knowledge. Piedrahita had offered Cartagena food and baby clothes before drugging her with a sleeping pill mixed into her coffee. Then in Skidmore, Missouri, Bobby Joe Stennett died of strangulation at the age of 23 at the hands of 37-year-old Lisa M. Montgomery. The two had been in contact previously. They were both rat terrier breeders in a dog show circuit. Montgomery had even emailed the victim, telling her that she wished to purchase one of her dogs. Montgomery faked a pregnancy, and on December 16th, she drove from her Kansas home to Skidmore, Missouri. After strangling Stennett to death, Montgomery cut open her abdomen and took her 1-month premature daughter. An hour later, the victim's mother found her body, and in less than 24 hours later, Victoria Jo Stennett, the victim's stolen fetus, was found healthy in Malkervin, Kansas. And so Lisa Montgomery was incarcerated, and a jury subsequently sentenced her to death. Montgomery was executed by lethal injection on January 13th, 2021. On August 28, 24-year-old Flavia Godito Mafra was 8 months and 2 weeks pregnant. She was lured to a fake baby shower in São João Batista, Santa Catarina, Brazil. She was later found dead due to cuts from her abdomen due to her baby being removed and from being struck with a brick. A 26-year-old suspect was arrested in connection with the murder. The woman told police that she had suffered a 3-month miscarriage in January, but continued lying to everyone about still being pregnant. The baby luckily did survive the incident. Then finally, 21-year-old Reagan Simmons Hancock, who was 8 months pregnant, was killed on October 9th in New Boston, Texas. Her baby was cut from her body from 29-year-old Taylor Parker. The baby girl, Braxton Sage Simmons, did not survive, sadly. Parker, who claimed to only know Hancock by her first name, had been the photographer at Hancock's wedding the year before, and had spent time with Hancock the week of the murder, going out for a girls' day, and visited Hancock in her husband's home the night before, telling them she was to be induced the following day, the day the murders occurred. Parker was later arrested in Oklahoma in connection with the case. She was convicted of Hancock's murder on October 2022, and she was ultimately sentenced to death on November of 2022, unquote. I could go on for a while, but I think by now you get a very good idea of the way this type of disturbing crime often plays out, and by whom it happens to be played out by. Truly tragic and disturbing stuff. I don't often do this in these icebergs because you'd like to be as comprehensive and complete as possible when covering stuff, even if it is more uncomfortable. But that being said, 2 entries this tier I am going to go ahead and opt to skip out on the details of, with the first being the murder of Kelly Ann Bates, and the second being the murder of Suzanne Capper. While I do believe it is worthwhile always pointing out the cruel acts of humanity, and certainly these poor teenage women's stories deserve to be told, as well as the stories of the cruel, disgusting people who held them captive and tortured them, I feel as though this iceberg at this point is starting to become a very much a story after story of a poor, innocent teenage girl being tortured by cruel, disgusting people. And there's only so many stories I can read about that and detail you all the grisly details of before it starts getting uncomfortable even for me as someone who is used to making these disturbing, creepy, fucked up topic icebergs. I'll just say this, that both Suzanne Capper and Kellyanne Bates were both young women who deserved so much more than the cruel fates befell them at the torturous hands of disgusting individuals, with Kelly sadly falling at the hands of a groomer who had managed to convince her that he loved her before torturing and killing her. Suzanne Capper falling to the hands of 4 cruel individuals that all had extremely petty reasons for ultimately making her suffer for over a week. One of which included the loss of a pink duffel bag. I'm seriously not kidding about that. If you want to go read their articles yourself, I more than respect your decision to go check those out and see all the details for yourself. Or if you happen to want to see a YouTube video about it, you can check out Shrouded Hands video on the Kellyanne bait situation. There's also lots of other videos that have covered it. Same thing goes for the Suzanne Capper case. There are lots of videos that have covered it. Here's a new video that I found by the Folklore Files that was quick and concise if you want to just get the basic story. But I hope that you can all respect my decision to go ahead and not cover these types of stories anymore, at least not in this iceberg, as I feel like after going into all the gruesome detail of Junko Furuta and Sylvia Likens, I'm going to personally take a break from these types of stories. May they all rest in peace, and all the disgusting individuals that caused them such horrible pain and suffering burn in hell. Bonus entry, Hanatarash, as suggested by Tim2716. Quote, Hanatarash, meaning sniveler or snot-nosed in Japanese, was a noise band created by later Boardrum's frontman Yamontanka Ai and featured Zeni Giva and guitarist Mitsuru Tabata. The outfit was formed in Osaka, Japan in 1983 after Ai and Tabata met as stagehands at an Einstransel Newbotten show. Sorry if I mispronounced that. After the release of the first album, the I was dropped and the name became Hanatarash. They used a variety of unusual noise-making objects, including power tools, drills, and heavy machinery. Hanatarash was notorious for their dangerous live shows. Some of the band's most infamous shows included eye-cutting a dead cat in half with a machete, strapping a circular saw on his back and almost cutting his leg off, and destroying part of the venue with an excavator by driving it through the back wall and onto the stage. At the 1985 show in Tokyo Superloft, the audience were required to fill out forms due to the possibility of harm caused by the show. The show was stopped due to Ai preparing to throw a lit Molotov cocktail onto the stage. The performance cost 600,000 yen, or approximately $9,000 US in repairs. After several years of the intense live shows, Hanatarash was forbidden from performing at most venues, and were only allowed to return to live performance in the 1990s after Ai would agree to cease his destructive onstage behavior, unquote. So, yeah, pretty interesting band to say the least. And in case you're curious, here's a couple clips of what they sounded like, or what it would have been like to hear them live. So, yeah. Bonus entry. H.H. Holmes. Oh boy, we have yet another serial killer. In this one, well, I suppose I'll just read the article. Quote, Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, or H.H. Holmes, was an American con artist and serial killer active between 1891 and 1894. By the time of his execution in 1896, Holmes had engaged in a lengthy criminal career that included insurance fraud, forgery, swindling, 3 or 4 bigamous marriages, horse theft, and murder. His most notorious crimes took place in Chicago around the time of the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. Despite his confession of 27 murders, including some people who were verifiably still alive, Holmes was convicted and sentenced to death for only one murder, that of business partner and possible accomplice Benjamin Pitzel. It is believed he also had killed 3 of Pitzel's children, as well as 3 mistresses. the child of one mistress and the sister of another. Holmes was ultimately hanged on May 7th of 1896. Much of the lore attached to Holmes concerned the so-called Murder Castle, a 3-story building he commissioned in Chicago. Details about the building, along with many of his alleged crimes, are considered exaggerated or fabricated for sensationalistic tabloid pieces, with some accounts estimating his body count could be as high as 133 or even 200. Many of these inaccuracies have persisted due to the combination of ineffective police investigation and hyperbolic yellow journalism of the period, which are often cited as historical record. Holmes gave various contradictory accounts of his life, initially claiming innocence and then later that he was possessed by Satan. His propensity for lying has made it difficult for researchers to ascertain the truth on the basis of his statements. For example, he claimed that Dr. Robert Leacock, a fellow medical school classmate, was one of his first murder victims, and that he had killed him on 1886 for insurance money. However, Leacock died on October 5th of 1889 in Watford, Ontario, Canada. Since the 1990s, Holmes has often been described as a serial killer. In his book about Holmes, author Adam Seltzer writes, "Just killing several people isn't necessarily enough for most definitions of a serial killer. More often, it has to be a series of similar crimes committed over a period of time, usually more to satisfy the psychological urge on the killer's part than any more practical motive." He added, "The murders we can connect Holmes to generally had a clear motive. Someone knew too much, or was getting in his way, and couldn't be trusted. The murders weren't simply for the love of bloodshed, but a necessary part of furthering his swindling operations and protecting his lifestyle." Unquote. So yeah, there is more to his story, but as noted before, a lot of it was exaggerated at the time, for the sake of selling newspapers. Just in case you ever thought there was a time when journalism had any sort of ethics, well, think again. As for the claims surrounding the many deaths and the like from Holmes in his supposed murder castle, well, the main bit of evidence for this is his own word, which as established cannot exactly be trusted, as he's been caught lying many times, and seems to have a penchant for building himself up quite a lot. Also, this is just like a common practice with serial killers or killers, basically people who know they're going to die or be hung or put away in jail for life anyway, so they feel as though they might as well build up their legacy some, make sure that they are always reported in the history books and documentaries and YouTube videos like these, I suppose, by claiming that they killed way more people than they actually did. Nonetheless, though, he had killed at least several people, so a disgusting man he is all the same, even if the whole murder castle and him having like gas chambers set up in it and all these other elaborate things seem to all be completely made up. Less a madman with a house full of torture devices and various traps and the like, and more so just a simple con man who rather callously was going to kill anyone that got in the way of his business. Bonus entry: the Khmer Rouge. Quote, "The Khmer Rouge is the name that was popularly given to members of the Communist Party of Kampuchea, and by extension to the regime through which the CPK ruled Cambodia between 1975 and 1979. The name was coined in the 1960s by then Chief of State Norodom Sihanouk to describe his country's heterogeneous, communist-led dissidents, with whom he allied after the 1970 Cambodian coup d'etat. The Khmer Rouge army was slowly built up in the forests of eastern Cambodia during the late 1960s, supported by the North Vietnamese Army, the Viet Cong, and Pathet Lao, the Chinese Communist Party (CCP). Although it originally fought against Sihanouk, the Khmer Rouge changed its position and supported Sihanouk following the CCP's advice after he was overthrown in the 1970 coup d'etat by Lon Nol, who established the pro-American Khmer Republic. Despite a massive American bombing campaign, Operation Freedom Deal, against them, the Khmer Rouge won the Cambodian Civil War when they captured the Cambodian capital and overthrew the Khmer Republic in 1975. Following their victory, the Khmer Rouge, who were led by Pol Pot, Non Chi, Young Sari, Son Sen, and Khieu Samphan, immediately set about forcibly evacuating the country's major cities. In 1976, they renamed the country Democratic Kampuchea. The Khmer Rouge regime was highly autocratic, totalitarian, and repressive. Many deaths resulted from the regime's social engineering policies and the Moha Laut Plow, an imitation of China's Great Leap Forward, which had caused the Great Chinese Famine. Khmer Rouge's attempts at agricultural reform through collectivization similarly led to widespread famine, while its insistence on absolute self-sufficiency, including the supply of medicine, led to the death of many thousands from treatable diseases such as malaria. The Khmer Rouge regime murdered hundreds of thousands of their perceived political opponents, and its racist emphasis on natural purity resulted in the genocide of Cambodian minorities. Summary executions and tortures were carried out by its cadre, or executives, against perceived subversive elements, or during genocidal purges of its own ranks between 1975 and 1978. Ultimately, the Cambodian genocide, which took place under the Khmer Rouge regime, led to the deaths of 1.5 to 2 million people, or around 25% of Cambodia's population. Unquote. So yeah, another terrible communist regime that committed terrible crimes against humanity. Who could have guessed? But going into just a bit more detail, in particular, the details about their mass genocide. Quote, the Khmer Rouge targeted particular groups of people, among them Buddhist monks, ethnic minorities, and educated elites. Once in power, the Khmer Rouge explicitly targeted the Chinese and Vietnamese, the Cham minority, and even their partially Khmer offspring. The same attitude extended to the party's own ranks, as senior CPK figures of non-Khmer ethnicity were removed from the leadership despite extensive revolutionary experience and were often killed. A Vietnamese official called the Khmer Rouge leaders Hitler-like fascists, while the General Secretary of the Kampuchean People's Revolutionary Party, Pen Sovan, referred to the Khmer Rouge as a draconian, dictatorial, and fascist regime. Unquote. There were over 150 prisons set up for political opponents, with people being killed by the thousands, all buried together in mass graves, something which is actually detailed a bit more in a separate article called The Killing Fields, in which the torture they enacted upon their prisoners is more plainly laid out. Quote, the Killing Fields are sites of Cambodia where collectively more than 1,300,000 people were killed and buried by the Communist Party of Kampuchea during the Khmer Rouge rule from 1975 to 79, immediately after the end of the Cambodian Civil War. The mass killings were part of the broad state-sponsored Cambodian genocide. The Cambodian journalist Dith Pran coined the term Killing Fields after his escape from the regime. The judicial process of the Khmer Rouge regime for minor or political crimes began with a warning from the Angkar, the government of Cambodia under the regime. People receiving more than 2 warnings were sent for re-education, which meant near certain death. People were often encouraged to confess to Angkar their pre-revolutionary lifestyles and crimes, which usually included some kind of free market activity, having had contact with a foreign source, such as a U.S. missionary, international relief or government agency, or contact with any foreigner or with the outside world at all, being told that Angkar would forgive them and wipe the slate clean. They were then taken away to a place such as Sling or Chon Ik for torture and or execution. The executed were buried in mass graves, and in order to save ammunition, the executions were often carried out by poisoning or improvised weapons, such as sharpened bamboo sticks, hammers, machetes, and axes. Inside the Buddhist memorial stupa at Chong Ik, there is evidence of bayonets, knives, wooden clubs, hoes for farming, and curved scythes being used to kill victims, with images of skulls damaged by these implements as evidence. In some cases, the children and infants of adult victims were killed by having their heads bashed against the trunks of chankiri trees, and then were thrown into the pits alongside their parents. The rationale was to stop them from growing up and taking revenge for their parents' deaths. Unquote. Truly disgusting, evil, vile shit, all done under the name of communism under the command of Pol Pot. Certainly one of the most evil men who ever walked this earth. Bonus entry, Vault 7. And now it's time for a little bit of government corruption, America style. Quote, Vault 7 is a series of documents that WikiLeaks began to publish on the 7th of March, 2017, detailing the activities and capabilities of the United States Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, to perform electronic surveillance and cyber warfare. The files dating from 2013 to 2016 include details on the agency's software capabilities, such as the ability to compromise cars, smart TVs, web browsers including Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Mozilla Firefox, and Opera, the operating systems of most smartphones including Apple's iOS and Google's Android, and computer operating systems including Microsoft Windows, macOS, and Linux. The CIA internal audit identified 91 malware tools out of more than 500 tools in use in 2016 being compromised by the release. The tools were developed by the Operations Support Branch of the CIA. The Vault 7 release led to the CIA to redefine WikiLeaks as a non-state, hostile intelligence service. And in July 2022, former CIA software engineer Joshua Schultz was convicted of leaking the documents to WikiLeaks, and in February of 2024, sentenced to 40 years imprisonment on espionage counts and separately to 80 months for counts, unquote. So, just to be perfectly clear, this information leak is all about the CIA having malware tools that are capable of spying on literally everything you have regardless of the OS. It being your phone, computer, your car, regardless, they have access to all of it. But maybe you already knew that by now. But if you didn't, well, now you do. And the article continues with some info about some of these tools and softwares they have developed and how they were used, noting, quote, on March 23rd, 2017, WikiLeaks published the second release of Vault 7 material entitled Dark Matter. The publication included documentation for several CIA efforts to hack Apple's iPhones and Macs. These included the sonic screwdriver malware that could use the Thunderbolt interface to bypass Apple's password firmware protection. Then on the 31st of March 2017, WikiLeaks published the third part, Marble, and it contained a 676 source code files for the CIA's Marble framework. It is used to obfuscate or scramble malware code in an attempt to make it so that antivirus firms or investigators cannot understand the code or attribute its source. According to WikiLeaks, the code also included a deobfuscator to reverse the obfuscation effects. Another example was Grasshopper, which the publication contained 27 documents from the CIA's Grasshopper framework, which was used by the CIA to build a customized and persistent malware payloads for the Microsoft Windows operating system. Grasshopper focused on personal security product or PSP avoidance. PSPs are antivirus softwares such as MS Security Essentials, Symantec Endpoint, or Kaspersky AS. Then there is Hive, based on the CIA's top-secret virus program created by its Embedded Development Branch, or EDB. The 6 documents published by WikiLeaks are related to the Hive multi-platform CIA malware suite, a CIA backend infrastructure with a public-facing HTTPS interface, used by CIA to transfer information from target desktop computers and smartphones to the CIA, and open those devices to receive further commands from CIA operators to execute specific tasks, all while hiding its presence behind unsuspicious-looking public domains through a masking interface known as Switchblade, also known as Listening Post LP, and Command and Control. There's also the Weeping Angel, named or a monster on the TV show Doctor Who, a hacking tool co-developed by the CIA and MI5 used to exploit a series of early smart TVs for the purpose of covert intelligence gathering. Once installed in suitable televisions with a USB stick, the hacking tools enables those televisions built-in microphones and possibly video cameras to record their surroundings, while the televisions falsely appear to be turned off. The recorded data is then either stored locally into the television's memory or sent over the internet to the CIA. Allegedly, both the CIA and MI5 agencies collaborated to develop that malware in joint development workshops. Then finally, as one more example, after midnight, an assassin is a piece of malware installed on a target personal computer and disguises itself as a DLL file, which is executed while the user's computer reboots. It then triggers a connection to the CIA's command and control computer, from which it downloads various modules to run. As for Assassin, it is very similar to its after midnight counterpart, but it deceptively runs inside a Windows service process. CIA operators reportedly use Assassin as a C2 to execute a series of tasks, collect and then periodically send user data to the CIA listening posts, similar to a backdoor Trojan behavior. Both After Midnight and Assassin run on Windows operating system, are persistent, and periodically beacon to their configured LP to either request tasks or send private information to the CIA, as well as automatically uninstall themselves on a set date of time." Unquote. I could go on, but I think you get the idea by now. I suppose if you want to learn more info about this and the 20 other odd tools that they had for hacking and compromising literally every electronic device under the sun, it's all publicly available information at this point. Bonus entry: Mozart and scatology. Okay, time for a bit of a change of pace. A small bit of levity in this dark black pill crimes against humanity iceberg. So in essence, Mozart, you know, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, child prodigy, one of the most influential, well-known, and renowned classical composers and pianists to ever live. That Mozart? Well, he also thought doo-doo shit farts were pretty funny as well. Quote, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart displayed scatological humor in his letters and multiple recreational compositions. This material has long been a puzzle for Mozart scholarship. Some scholars try to understand it in the terms of its role in Mozart's family, his society, and his times. Others attempt to understand it as a result of an impressive list of psychiatric conditions from which Mozart is claimed to have suffered. A letter dated November 5th, 1775 to Mozart's cousin, Marina Anna Thekla Mozart, is an example of Mozart's use of scatology. The German original is in rhyme verse, and it goes,
I wish you good night, but first, shit in your bed and make it burst. Sleep soundly, my love. Into your mouth your arms you shove.
Then there's Mozart's canon Lich mein Arsch, which includes the lyrics Lich mein Arsch, geschwingi geschwingi. This would be translated into English as lick me in the arse, quickly, quickly. Benjamin Simkin, an endocrinologist, estimates that 39 of Mozart's letters include scatological passages. Almost all of these are directed at Mozart's own family, specifically his father Leopold, his mother Anna Maria, his sister Nanuri, and his cousin Maria Anna Thekla Mozart. According to Simkin, Leopold, Anna Maria, and Nannerl also included scatological humor in their own letters. Thus, Anna Maria wrote to her husband on the 26th of September 1777 this rhyme: Adieu, ben mio, keep well, my love, into your mouth your arse you'll shove. I wish you good night, my dear, but first, shit in your bed and make it burst. Unquote. And then the following is also a passage from a far larger letter Mozart wrote to, once again, his cousin.
to kiss your own behind. I nod off to never, never land, and sleep as much as I can stand. Tomorrow we'll speak free, sensibly with each other, things I must you tell, and others believe it, you hardly can. Here tomorrow, already will you be well in the meantime? Oh, my last burns like fire, what on earth is the meaning of this? Baby Muck wants to come out, yes, yes, Muck. I know you see, you taste, you, and what's this? Is it possible, ye gods? Oh, you are mine, are you deceiving me? No, it's true, what a long and melancholy sound.
Yeah, this article is also really funny because it has several reports from people that seem to be psychoanalyzing Mozart's poop joke letters, these so-called Mozart scholars, as if it were the result of some sort of psychological issue within his own mind. Or that it perhaps has some deeper meaning about his family, or this says something about society, which is really funny because the most obvious answer as to why he wrote these letters and songs about shit and ass and all that sort of stuff is because he just had a crude sense of humor, and like so many, also enjoyed the occasional shitpost. So I suppose never forget that one of the most well-renowned artists, creators of music of all time, also enjoyed a good doo-doo brap shit fart diarrhea joke. Bonus entry, puppy pregnancy syndrome, as suggested by me. Quote, puppy pregnancy syndrome, or PPS, is a psychosomatic illness in humans brought on by mass hysteria. People suffering from PPS believe that shortly after being bitten by a dog, puppies are conceived within their abdomen. The syndrome is thought to be localized in villages in several states of India, and some psychiatrists believe that PPS meets the criteria for a culture-bound disorder. Witch doctors offer oral cures, which they claim will dissolve the puppies. And doctors in India have tried to educate the public that this condition is impossible and a superstition, and that treating this condition instead of rabies can be very dangerous, unquote. Which, yeah. And going into just a little bit more detail on these victims, they are said to bark like dogs, and were reported being able to see the puppies inside them when looking at water, or hear them growling in their abdomen. And it is believed that victims will eventually die, especially men, who will have to give birth to the puppies through their dicks. Sounds like people are either crazy going into a LARP, like a mass hysteria type LARP, or, you know, going fucking crazy because they are infected with rabies. But either way, it's a pretty wild thing and phenomenon all the same. Locked-in syndrome. Quote, locked-in syndrome, or LIS, also known as pseudocoma, is a condition in which a patient is aware but cannot move or communicate verbally due to a complete paralysis of nearly all voluntary muscles in the body except for vertical eye movements and blinking. The individual is conscious and sufficiently enact cognitively to be able to communicate with eye movements. Electroencephalography results are normal in locked-in syndrome. Total locked-in syndrome, or complete locked-in state, or CLIS, is a version of locked-in syndrome wherein the eyes are paralyzed as well, unquote. There isn't a whole lot more to this article besides noting some of the signs of this syndrome developing, all of which sounds like it's horrifying beyond belief. Basically, you would just be a conscious, trapped inside your own body, and it is often also described as a kind of permanent sleep paralysis. So, have fun thinking about that, I suppose. Suomu Miyazaki. Quote, Suomu Miyazaki was a Japanese serial killer who murdered 4 young girls in Tokyo and Saitama Prefecture between August 1988 and June of 1989. He abducted and killed the girls aged from 4 to 7 in his car bar before dismembering them and molesting their corpses. He also engaged in cannibalism, preserved body parts as trophies, and taunted the families of his victims. Miyazaki was arrested in Hachijo in July of 1989 after being confronted while taking nude photographs of a young girl. He was diagnosed as having one or more personality disorders, but was determined by authorities to be sane and aware of his crimes and their consequences, and thus Miyazaki was sentenced to death in 1997 and was executed by hanging in 2008. Miyazaki was dubbed the otaku killer due to his extensive collection of pornography, anime, manga, and horror videotapes. This triggered a widespread moral panic against otaku in Japan, similar to the satanic panic in America, unquote. And that's the basics, but going into a little bit more detail and the story of this so-called otaku killer, Tsutomu Miyazaki was born on the 25th of August in 1962 and was the son of a wealthy family, but he was born premature with a birth defect that caused his hand joints to be fused together, preventing him from being able to bend his wrist upward. Miyazaki was ostracized when he attended elementary school due to his deformity, and consequently kept to himself. He attended Meidai Nakano High School in Nakano, a prestigious high school associated with Meiji University, and was a star student until his grades began to drop dramatically. Although his family was highly influential in Itsukachi, he expressed no desire to take over their business. After his arrest, Miyazaki would say that what he really craved was being listened to about his problems. He believed that his parents, more worried about the material than the sentimental, would not have heard him. He would have been ignored. And in the same confession, he said that there was a period of his life where he had begun to consider going into more details about the murders. Miyazaki would end up murdering Mari Kano, a 4-year-old, Masami Yoshizawa, 7-year-old, Erika Namba, a 4-year-old, and Ayako Nomoto, 5 years old. And what made all these murders worse is the fact that he not only kidnapped, tortured, killed, and performed sexual acts upon their bodies, but he also cut off their hands and feet and kept them as trophies, and would then send letters to the families of the children he murdered, mocking them. With one letter he wrote to the family of Erika Namba, simply saying, quote, "Erika, cold, cough, throat, rest, death," unquote. And after these 4 murders over the course of this over a year or so of kidnapping and brutally ending the lives of these innocent young girls, on July 23rd, 1989, quote, Miyazaki saw 2 sisters playing in the park of Hachijo and managed to separate the younger of the sisters from the older one, who stayed behind. He was taking photographs of the younger daughter, whom he had convinced to strip nude, when he was caught by their father, who attacked Miyazaki but was unable to restrain him. After fleeing on foot, Miyazaki eventually returned to the park to retrieve his car, whereupon he was arrested by police responding to a call by the father. A search of his 2-room bungalow produced 5,763 videotapes, some containing anime and slasher films, later used as reasoning for his crimes. Interspersed among them was video footage and photos of his victims. Miyazaki, who retained a perpetually calm and collected demeanor during his trial, appeared indifferent to his capture. Japanese media dubbed Miyazaki the otaku killer in reference to the otaku culture. His killing caused a moral panic against otaku, with speculation that anime and horror films had made him into a murderer. Various newspapers claimed that Miyazaki had retreated into a fantasy world of manga as a result of his neglected upbringing. Keigo Okanogi, a psychoanalyst at Tokyo International University, told the Shuken Post that the danger of a whole generation of youth who do not even experience the most primary 2- or 3-way relationship between themselves and their mother and father, and who cannot make the transition from a fantasy world of videos and manga to reality, is now extreme. These reports were disputed. Eiji Otsuka's book on Miyazaki's crimes he argued that Miyazaki's collection of pornography was probably added or amended by a photographer in order to highlight his perversity. Another critic, Fumiya Ichihanshi, suspected the released information played up to the public stereotypes and fears about otaku, as the police knew they would help cement a conviction. Sharon Kinsella asserts that large collections of manga and videos were typical in the rooms of youths living in the Tokyo area at the time, unquote. This sadly being another example of a living monster and a disgusting piece of shit who committed some of the most evil acts one can upon the innocent, and people desperately needing an answer to his depravity, blaming the things they watched or enjoyed, in this case being manga, anime, and slasher films, when in reality Miyazaki, like so many of his evil ilk, are just simply evil, and it really didn't matter what they enjoyed in their free time, and it's perhaps that dark reality that is so much more scary and hard for people to wrestle with. After all, for every one Miyazaki, there's about, I don't know, 1 million people that just watch and read this stuff and don't go around killing little girls. All my hope are resting in peace now. Crush Fetish. Now this is one of those articles that at first glance is just like a random fetish, you know? When all of a sudden it becomes one of the most fucked up and weird pages on this iceberg. So with that in mind, quote, a crush fetish is a fetish and a paraphilia in which sexual arousal is associated with observing objects being crushed or being crushed oneself. The crushed objects vary from inanimate items, examples being food, to injuring and or fatal crushing of invertebrates, examples being insects, snails, worms, spiders, to vertebrates, examples being birds, reptiles, and mammals. In the most severe cases, crushing has involved homicide or extended torture until the death of restrained animals including dogs, cats, pigs, and monkeys. Animal welfare organizations such as the Humane Society of the United States condemn this practice and consider it extremely disturbing. Additionally, links between animal abuse and violence towards humans are being researched, with animal abuse perhaps being a precursor to further violence. And animal cruelty causes have been tracked by the American FBI since 2016. The motivation for these acts may be in the financial gain derived from producing films of the acts, which is sold on the internet to crush fetishists who find the content sexually gratifying and perhaps entertaining, a tailored genre known as crush film. Those in impoverished areas may be more likely to produce and star in this content due to the financial gain. There are currently no laws specifically forbidding the crushing of animals, but the production or trade of crush erotica involving live vertebrates is illegal in many countries, including the United States, Italy, and the United Kingdom. In the United States, interstate commerce in hard crush videos, that's the ones where it's specifically like animals like dogs and stuff, by the way, has been illegal since 2010, and many other countries also have banned them. In crush films, the crushing agent is typically a woman who will concentrate her body weight upon her feet to compress the object against the floor. The feet are typically dressed in sexually suggestive dominatrix-like footwear, such as high heels and lace stockings, but other footwear or bare feet may be used. This recalls elements of both foot fetishism and BDSM culture. Jeff Villalencia is one known director of crush films, such as Smush. Jeff, along with many other fetishists, has loved to see invertebrates crushed since a young age. He claims that when he was 2 to 3 years old, he repeatedly attempted to get people to step on him, unquote. So, yeah, quite unhinged, I'd say. And just a little bit more lore about this one that you may or may not be aware of, but these crush videos were once shared around on YouTube quite a bit back in the day. And many of the more basic type ones where they just kind of crush food and shit is still very popular and has lots of views all over the place on YouTube. You'll often find ones with people wearing boots crushing things as a popular example, which I suppose is is fine, whatever. But sadly, at one point or another, the worst of these types of videos, the types where they step on cats, dogs, birds, etc., and other such animals, were shared secretly in private or unlisted playlists on this platform. They have since mostly been purged for the most part, but it was once possible to find these videos, as they would also end up in other playlists that were not unlisted, which is quite disgusting and again, evil overall. Bonus entry, Hibakusha. Quote, Hibakusha, or survivor of the bomb, or person affected by exposure to radioactivity, is a word of Japanese origin generally designating the people affected by the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the United States at the end of World War II. The Atomic Bomb Survivors Relief Law defines Hibakusha as people who fall into one or more of the following categories: within a few kilometers of the hypocenters of the bombs, within 2 kilometers of the hypocenters, within 2 weeks of the bombings, exposed to radiation from fallout, or not yet born but carried by pregnant women in any of these categories. The Japanese government has recognized about 650,000 people Hibakusha. As of March 31st, 2023, 113,649 were still alive, mostly in Japan, and in 2024 are expected to surpass the number of surviving U.S. World War veterans. The government of Japanese recognize about 1% of these as having illnesses caused by radiation. Hibakusha are entitled to government support. They receive a certain amount of allowance per month, and the ones certified as suffering from bomb-related diseases receive a special medical allowance. The memorials of Hiroshima and Nagasaki contain a list of names of the Hibakusha who are known to have died since the bombings, updated annually on the anniversaries of the bombings. As of August 2023, the memorials record the names of 534,000 Hibakusha, 339,227 of which from Hiroshima, and 195,607 from Nagasaki, unquote. Now, I can't show you these pictures on YouTube, but this article in particular is quite grisly and tragic, as there are photos of the people affected by the bombs, with one picture in particular showing someone's skin on their back rotting away, as well as an extremely tragic photo of a boy, about 10 years old or so, waiting in line at a crematorium, with his dead baby brother strapped to his back. Bonus entry, Rock Tero. Rock Tero was a Canadian cult leader and convicted murderer. Tero, a self-proclaimed prophet under the name Moïse, French for Moses, founded the Ant Hill Kids in 1977. They were a doomsday cult whose beliefs were based on those of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In April of 1978, Tero was removed from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He maintained multiple wives and concubines, impregnating all female members as a religious requirement, and fathering 26 children. Tero's followers, including 12 adults and 22 children, lived under his totalitarian rule in a commune and were subject to severe physical and sexual abuse. Tero was arrested for assault in 1989, dissolving the cult, and in 1993 was convicted for the murder of follower Solange Boilard. He had previously killed an infant named Samuel Jaguar, while 2 of his disciples, Geraldine Gagny Auclair and Gabriel Nadeau, died following homeopathic treatments administered to them by Tero. Tero received a life sentence, which he was serving when he was murdered at the Dorchester Penitentiary in 2011. Tero, along with Robert Picton, Clifford Olson, and Paul Bernardo, has been considered one of Canada's most notorious criminals since the 1980s. Unquote. Those are the basics. basics, but going into just a little bit more detail regarding this truly conniving individual and his cult, Roch Tero was born on the 16th of May in 1947 into a French-Canadian family. As a child, Tero was considered to be very intelligent, but dropped out of school in the 7th grade and began to teach himself the Old Testament of the Bible. Tero believed that the end of the world was near and would be brought on by the war between good and evil. Tero converted from Catholicism to the Seventh-day Adventist Church in January of 1977 and began practicing the denomination's regular holistic beliefs, which encouraged a healthy lifestyle free of unhealthy foods and tobacco. Then, quote, in the mid-1970s, Tero convinced a group of people to leave their jobs and homes to join him in a religious movement. Tero formed the cult in 1977 in Sainte Marie, Quebec, with the goal to form a commune where people could freely listen to his motivational speeches, live in unity and equality, and be free of sin. He prohibited the group from remaining in contact with their families and with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, as this was against his cult's values of freedom. Tero's fear of the end of the world grew, claiming that God had warned him that it would come in February of 1979, and used the commune to prepare for it. In 1978, in preparation, Tero moved his commune by hiking to a mountainside he called Eternal Mountain in Hope in the sparsely populated Gaspé Peninsula, where he claimed they could all be saved. There, Tero made the commune build their own town while he relaxed, comparing them to ants working in an anthill, and naming the group the Anthill Kids. In February of 1979, when the apocalypse did not occur, people started questioning Tero's wisdom, but he defended himself by saying that time on Earth and in God's world were not parallel, and that therefore it was a miscalculation to expand the community as well as to keep the members devoted. Tero married and impregnated all the women in the commune, fathering over 20 children with 9 female members of the group. By the 1980s, there were nearly 40 members. Followers were made to wear identical tunics to represent equality and their devotion to the commune. Following the cult's formation, Tero began to move away from being a motivational leader as his drinking problem worsened, exerting an increasingly totalitarian control over the lives of his followers and becoming irrational in his beliefs. Members were not allowed to speak to each other when he was not present, nor to have sex with each other without his permission. Tero used his charisma to cover for his increasingly abusive and erratic behavior, and none of the other members questioned his judgment or openly blamed him for any physical, mental, or emotional damage. Tero began to inflict punishments on the followers that he considered to be straying by spying on them and claiming that God told him what they did. If a person wished to leave the commune, Tero would hit them with either a bilt or a hammer, suspend them from the ceiling, pluck each of their body hairs individually, or even defecate on them. The Anthill Kids raised money for living by selling baked goods, and members who did not bring in enough money were also punished. Over time, Tero's punishments became increasingly extreme and violent, including making members break their own legs with sledgehammers, sit on lit stoves, shoot each other in the shoulders, and eat dead mice and feces. A follower would sometimes be asked to cut off another person's toes with wire cutters to prove loyalty. The abuse extended to the cult's children, who were sexually abused, held over fires, or nailed to trees, while other children threw stones at them. One of Tero's wives left a newborn child, Eliezer Lavalle, outside to die in freezing temperatures to keep him away from the abuse. Tero attempted to backtrack to the original religious mission of the commune, beginning to strongly believe in purifying his followers and ridding them of their sins through abusive purification sessions, where the members would be completely nude as he whipped and beat them. Tero claimed to be a holy being and started performing unnecessary amateur surgical operations on sick members to demonstrate his healing powers. These surgeries included injecting a 94% ethanol solution into stomachs or performing circumcisions on the children and adults of the group, and in 1987 social workers removed 7 of the children from the commune. However, Tero faced no repercussions for his abusive acts." Unquote. I could go into even more details regarding the abuse and stuff, but I think you get the point with that. Ultimately, the abuse and heinous crimes all eventually came to an end when Lavelle underwent harsh treatment at the Ontario Commune during the late 1980s, and after surviving several of her teeth being removed and one of her arms being cut off, amongst many, many other things that she suffered, and she was luckily actually able to escape and contact authorities, effectively dissolving the anthills. Tero was found guilty of assault for the amputation of Lavelle's arm and received a sentence of 12 years imprisonment. The vast majority of the cult's followers abandoned Tero after his arrest, and Lavelle's report allowed further investigation into Tero's actions, exposing the wider abuse at the communes, as well as Soilang Boilard's murder. And in 1993, Tero pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for the death of Boilard and was sentenced to life imprisonment. In 2000, Tero was transferred to the Dorchester Penitentiary, a medium-security prison in Dorchester, New Brunswick. And in 2002, Tero was rejected for parole as he was considered too high risk to reoffend, and so he never applied again. Sadly, nothing can take away all the pain and suffering he caused to all those men, women, and especially the children. This story actually does have a bit of a nice ending, at least as far as people getting what they deserve. In quote, on February 26th, 2011, at age 63, Tero was found dead near his cell in Dorchester Penitentiary. His death is believed to be the result of an altercation with his cellmate, Matthew Gerard MacDonald, a 60-year-old convicted murderer from Port-au-Port, Newfoundland and Labrador, who was charged with the killing. MacDonald pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison, having already been served a life sentence for a previous murder charge. MacDonald had stabbed Tero in the neck with a shiv, walked to the guard station, handed them the weapon, and proclaimed, "That piece of shit is down on the range. Here's the knife. I've sliced him up." Unquote. Honestly, pretty based. And while we're on the topic of cult leaders, Adolfo Constanzo. Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo was a Cuban-American serial killer, drug dealer, and cult leader who led an infamous drug trafficking and occult gang in Matamoros, Tamaulipas, Mexico, that was dubbed the Narco-Satanists by the media. His cult members nicknamed him the Godfather. Constanzo led the cult with Sarah Aldry, whom followers nicknamed the Godmother. The cult was involved in multiple ritualistic killings in Matamoros, including the murder of Mark Kilroy, an American student abducted, tortured, and killed in the area of 1989. Adolfo Constanzo was born in Miami, Florida, to Delia Aurora Gonzalez, a Cuban immigrant, in 1962. She gave birth to Adolfo at the age of 15 and eventually had 3 children by different fathers. Delia moved to San Juan, Puerto Rico after her first husband died and remarried there. Constanzo was baptized Catholic and served as an altar boy, but also accompanied his mother on trips to Haiti to learn about voodoo. Constanzo's family returned to Miami in 1972, and his stepfather died soon after, leaving the family with some money. As a teenager, he became apprenticed to a local sorcerer and began to practice a religion called Palo Mayombe, which involves animal sacrifice. Delia then remarried, and his new stepfather was involved in both the religion and drug dealing. Constanzo and his mother were arrested numerous times for theft, vandalism, and shoplifting, and he graduated from high school but was expelled from prep school. As an adult, Constanzo moved to Mexico City and met the men who were to become his followers: Martin Quintana, Jorge Montes, and Omar Oria. They began to run a profitable business casting spells to bring good luck, which involved expensive ritual sacrifices of chickens, goats, snakes, zebras, and even lion cubs. Many of his clients were rich drug dealers and hitmen who enjoyed the violence of Constanzo's magical displays. He also attracted other rich members of Mexican society, including several high-ranking corrupt policemen who introduced him to the city's powerful drug cartels. His cult was said to be associated with the notable Gulf Cartel. Constanzo started to raid graveyards for human bones to put them in his nanga, or cauldron. Before long, his cult decided that the spirits of the dead that resided in the cauldron would be stronger, providing the cult more powerful protection with live human sacrifices instead of old bones. The resulting killings soon totaled more than 20 victims, whose mutilated bodies were found in and around Mexico City. This process escalated until Constanzo eventually decided that the gang needed the power of a brain from an American student, culminating in the 1989 murder of Mark Kilroy, unquote. So in case you ever wondered if there was a serial killer, drug-dealing cult leader, witch doctor, who performs human sacrifices for the Mexican drug cartel, well, now you know that there was one. And being clear on that, the murder of Mark Kilroy, it actually has its own article, which I'll read a bit of, as it showcases the pure depravity of both Constanzo and the tragedy that befell Mark Kilroy. Quote, on March 14th, 1989, University of Texas at Austin student Mark James Kilroy was kidnapped in Matamoros, Tamaulipas, Mexico, while vacationing during spring break. He was taken by his abductors to a ranch, where he was tortured and sodomized for hours before being murdered in a human sacrifice ritual. Kilroy was killed with a machete blow, and then had his brain removed and boiled in a pot. His killers then inserted a wire through his spinal column, amputated his legs and knees, and buried him at the ranch, along with 14 other people who had been killed there before him. Adolfo Constanzo, the leader of the cult, told his followers that human sacrifice granted them immunity from law enforcement for their drug smuggling operations. The killing drew worldwide media attention and initiated an international police manhunt because of the unusual circumstances of the crime, unquote. Many of you are probably aware of just how scary many of the Mexican cartels are. Some of you may be even aware of the grisly videos that have come out of the cartel as a means of intimidation and scaring people even further. Well, bearing all that in mind, this guy, Constanzo, and those that follow him were so fucked up that they actually managed to scare those cartels. As the article goes on to note, quote, Constanzo began to believe that his magic, much of which he took from Paulo Mayobi, was responsible for the success of the cartels and demanded to become a full business partner with one of the most powerful families he knew, the Calzadas. When his demand was rejected, 7 family members disappeared. Their bodies turned up later with fingers, toes, ears, brains, and even, in one case, the spine missing. Constanzo soon made friends with a new cartel, the Hernandez brothers. He also took up with a young woman named Sarah Aldry, who became the high priestess of the cult. Constanzo made Aldry second in command of his cult and directed her to supervise his followers while he was shipping marijuana over the border into the US, unquote. But in the end, the murder of Mark Kilroy and the attention that brought onto Constanzo and his cult was their ultimate undoing, with the article noting, quote, Constanzo fled to Mexico City with 4 of his followers. They were only discovered when police were called to the apartment because of an unrelated dispute taking place there. As the officers approached, Constanzo mistakenly believed that they had located him, opened fire with a machine gun. This ended up bringing in more police reinforcements. Determined to not go to prison, he handed the gun to follower Alvaro de Leon and ordered him to open fire on him and Martin Quintana. By the time police reached the apartment, both Constanzo and Quintana were dead. De Leon, known as El Dubi, and Sarah Altry were immediately arrested. A total of 14 cult members were charged with a range of crimes, from murder and drug running to obstructing the course of justice. Sarah Aldry, Elio Hernandez, and Serafin Hernandez were convicted of multiple murders and were ordered to serve prison sentences of over 60 years each. De Leon was given a 30-year term, and it's noted that if co-leader Aldry is ever released from prison, American authorities plan to prosecute her for the murder of Mark Kilroy, unquote. Bonus entry, blowing from a gun. Quote, blowing from a gun is a method of execution in which the victim is typically tied to the mouth of a cannon, which is then fired, resulting in death. George Carter Stent described the process as follows. The prisoner is generally tied to a gun, with the upper part of the small of his back resting against the muzzle. When the gun is fired, his head is seen to go straight up into the air, some 40 or 50 feet. The arms fly off right and left, high up into the air, and fall at perhaps 100 yards distance. The legs drop to the ground beneath the muzzle of the gun, and the body is literally blown away altogether, not a visage being seen. Blowing from a gun was a reported means of execution as long ago as the 16th century, and was used until the 20th century. The method was used by the Portuguese in the 16th and 17th centuries, from as early as 1509 across their empire from Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, to Brazil. And the Mughals used the method throughout the 17th century and onto the 18th, particularly against rebels." Unquote. Damn, really gives a whole new meaning to blowing out someone's back. Bonus entry, Bummer and Lazarus. Bummer and Lazarus were two stray dogs that roamed the streets of San Francisco, California, United States in the early 1860s. Recognized for the unique bond and their prodigious rat-killing ability, they became a fixture in city newspapers, were exempted from local ordinances, and immortalized in cartoons. San Francisco, in common with other cities in the United States at the time, had a problem with free-ranging dogs. In Los Angeles in the 1940s, dogs outnumbered people by nearly 2 to 1, and while the situation in San Francisco had not reached this extreme, the large numbers of strays and feral dogs did cause problems. Dogs were regularly poisoned or trapped and killed. Nevertheless, if a dog turned out to be a good ratter or distinguish itself in some other way, it was still possible for it to survive. Bummer was a black and white Newfoundland or Newfoundland cross who established himself outside the saloon of Frederick Martin in 1860 and quickly proved to be an exceptional rat killer. Then in 1861, Bummer rescued another dog from a fight with a larger canine opponent. The rescued dog was badly injured, with a deep wound on his leg, and was not expected to live. Bummer coaxed him to eat, brought back scraps from his scavenging missions, and huddled next to him to keep him warm during the night. The injured dog quickly recovered, and within days was following Bummer as he made his begging rounds in the streets. His remarkable recovery earned him the name Lazarus, and he proved to be an even more prodigious ratter than Bummer. As a team, they turned out to be exceptional, once finishing off 85 rats in 20 minutes. Their ratting talent and unique bond was seized upon by the city's press. Martin's Saloon was a favorite haunt of newspapermen and journalists, so, with the dogs a fixture outside the bar, they never had to travel far for a story. The exploits of the dogs were recorded in detail in the Californian, Daily Alta California, Daily Morning Call, and Daily Evening Bulletin. The editors vying with each other in their attempts to endow the pair's adventures with thrills and parallels to the human condition. Bummer was portrayed as the gentleman, down on his luck, yet still faithful and conscientious, while Lazarus, the mongrel, was cast as the role of the sly and self-serving fair-weather friend. When Bummer was shot in the leg after only a couple months, and Lazarus left him to run with another dog, it suited the press no end. Bummer was said to be feeling the sting of ingratitude at the desertion of the cur he had saved from death, and Lazarus's return when Bummer recovered only added to the excitement. The two dogs had the run of the streets, and when on June 14th, 1862, Lazarus was taken by a new dog catcher, a mob of angry citizens demanded his release, petitioning to have the pair declared city property so that they could wander the streets unmolested. The city supervisors released Lazarus and declared that he and Bummer were exempt from the city ordinance against strays. A week later, the two were reported to have stopped a runaway horse. Despite their reputations, the two could be vicious though. Bummer was a sheep killer and regularly fought other dogs in the streets, occasionally assisted by Lazarus, although normally Lazarus would restrict himself to barking encouragement. They also ransacked shops when they had entered unnoticed, and had been locked in by the owners, unquote. I love how much like a novel this whole story feels. Something out of the pages of Richard Adam or something like that. It's kind of wholesome despite the dark grittiness of the whole setting and everything else, I suppose. Sadly, all wholesome dog stories must come to a sad end, and so too was the case for this, as Lazarus would end up being killed in October in 1863, with some accounts saying that he was kicked by somebody to others saying that he was poisoned with meat laced with ratbane. But either way, people genuinely mourned over the death of Lazarus, and the Daily Evening Bulletin even featured a long obituary entitled Lament for Lazarus, in which they praised the virtues of both dogs and recounted their various adventures together, with there even being art of Bummer mourning the loss of his friend, as well as a bunch of other people mourning the loss of Lazarus. Bummer would continue on for a while longer, and there were even reports of him having taken in a small black puppy under his wings, according to Mark Twain himself. But eventually, so too, Bummer did pass away, though it seems he actually passed of old age rather than any tragic event, seeing that no dog could ever take down Bummer. So in the end, he passed away quietly amongst people who loved him. Once again, a artist depiction showcasing him passing away, Lazarus waiting for him to pass over to the other side, and rats paying respects to the #1 rat killer. May both of those good boys rest in peace. Bonus entry, Kazumarzu. Quote, Kazumarzu is a traditional Sardinian sheep milk cheese that contains live insect larvae. Derived from pecorino, Kazumarzu goes beyond typical fermentation to a stage of decomposition, brought about by the digestive action of the larvae of the cheese fly of the Pyaphilidae family. These larvae are deliberately introduced to the cheese, promoting an advanced level of fermentation and breaking down of the cheese fats. The texture of the cheese becomes very soft, with some liquid seeping out. The larvae themselves appear to be translucent white worms, roughly 8 millimeters long. When consumed, the larvae can possibly survive in the intestine, causing enteric pseudomyiasis, though no cases have been linked to the cheese. Additionally, these larvae can carry harmful microorganisms that may lead to infections. Due to these risks, Italian authorities have banned the sale of this cheese, deeming it dangerous. Consequently, it has also been prohibited across the European Union, as EU food safety regulations mandate that only food safe for consumption can be sold. Kazumatsu is considered by Sardinian aficionados to be unsafe to eat when the maggots in the cheese have died. Because of this, only cheese in which the maggots are still alive is usually eaten, although allowances are made for cheese when they have been refrigerated, which results in the maggots being killed. When the cheese has fermented enough, it is often cut into thin strips and spread on moistened Sardinian flatbread to be served with a strong red wine like Candanao. Because the larvae in the cheese can launch themselves distances up to 15 centimeters when disturbed, diners hold their hands above the sandwich to prevent the maggots from leaping. Some who eat the cheese prefer not to ingest the maggots. Those who do not wish to eat them place the cheese in a sealed paper bag. The maggots, starved for oxygen, writhe and jump in the bag, creating a pitter-patter sound. When the sounds subside, the maggots are dead, and the cheese can be eaten, unquote. So, yeah, now you all know the lore and the proper etiquette for how to eat maggot-infested cheese, where the maggots must be eaten while alive, but be careful because they may jump into your face. I'm sure many of you found that information quite helpful. Kermit Gosnell. Quote, Kermit Baron Gosnell is an American serial killer and former abortion doctor. He provided illegal late-term abortions at his clinic in West Philadelphia. Gosnell was convicted of the murders of 3 infants who were born alive after using drugs to induce labor, the manslaughter of 1 woman during an abortion procedure, and of several other abortion and drug-related crimes. Staff at Gosnell's clinic testified that there were hundreds of infants infants born alive during abortion procedures and subsequently killed by Gosnell. Gosnell, based in the Manto neighborhood in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, owned and operated the Women's Medical Society Clinic, a non-compliant abortion clinic that was dubbed a house of horrors during his criminal trial. In a 2010 raid, authorities found the intact human remains of 47 victims, stored in bags and cartons, numerous of which were suspected and later confirmed to be victims of infanticide. In 2011, Gosnell, his wife Pearl, and 8 employees were charged with a total of 32 felonies and 227 misdemeanors in connection with numerous deaths, illegal abortion procedures, and regulatory violations. Gosnell was also a prolific prescriber of numerous controlled substances, including OxyContin. Pearl and the 8 employees pleaded guilty to various charges in 2011, while Gosnell pleaded not guilty and sought a jury trial. In May of 2013, Gosnell was convicted of first-degree murder in the deaths of 3 of the infants, and involuntary manslaughter in the death of Karnamaya Monger, an adult patient at the clinic who died following an abortion procedure. Gosnell was also convicted of 21 felony counts of illegal late-term abortion and 211 counts of violating Pennsylvania's 24-hour informed consent law. After his conviction, Gosnell waived his right to appeal in exchange for an agreement by prosecutors to not seek the death penalty. He was then sentenced to life in prison without parole. Gosnell was sentenced to an additional 30 years in prison for federal drug charges as well. Gosnell is currently incarcerated at SCI Huntington, unquote. Now, there is more details I could go into about this one, but I think you get the point of it. I will say that this article in particular is quite disturbing and upsetting, not just for the obvious subject matter and the pure evil on display by Gosnell, but also because there are pictures to accompany these crimes, notably loss of dead babies. So fair warning about this page, I'd say it's not for the faint of heart, but honestly, that would be underselling it. It's quite frankly extremely disturbing. List of incidents of cannibalism. This article, as you probably could guess, is a list of incidents of cannibalism. Go figure. With examples from prehistory all the way to modern day incidents. So with that in mind, we obviously can't go through the whole article, but I will read off a few key highlights and random stories as I happen to read them. Starting with, quote, "In prehistory, genetic studies have revealed a powerful episode of natural selection concurrent with the extinction of the Neanderthals, drawing on hundreds of studies in relation to the Kuru disease, which is only known to spread through cannibalism. Researchers concluded that the 127V gene, which is known for resisting Kuru-like diseases, indicates widespread cannibalism among early humans. If modern humans and Neanderthals, who coexisted at that time, both practiced cannibalism, it is theorized that this gene would have protected humans from such diseases, while Neanderthals, who might have lacked it, were more susceptible to them, a factor that might have contributed to their extinction. Valerius, who ruled Greek-settled Agrigento in Sicily as a tyrant, reportedly consumed suckling babies. In the 6th century, Emperor Wu of Liang in southern China allowed prisoners of war to be traded for food. They were caged, and whenever there was a demand for meat, some of them were taken out, cut, broiled, and consumed. A few years later, the usurper Ho Jing was defeated. Parts of his body were said to have been salted and distributed in the regions that had suffered the most from his wars, where they were boiled in stews and consumed by angry mobs. Crusaders were reported to have practiced cannibalism during the sieges of Antioch and of Marra in 1097 and 1098. Archaeologists found evidence of cannibalism in a Native American tribe in what is now Colorado, dating in 1150. Tibetan Buddhists would ritualistically consume the flesh of deceased people who were believed to have been born as Brahmins 7 times in order to absorb their essence, which they believe could aid in attaining enlightenment. The Mongols were reported by several European chroniclers, such as Matthew Paris, to have engaged in cannibalism. Giovanni da Pian del Crepine stated they did so only out of necessity, but Simon of St. Quentin believed that they were also motivated by pleasure and a desire to instill fear into their enemies. They invaded Hungary and penetrated Austria almost to Vienna in 1241 and 1242. To the south of Vienna, they reached the Austrian town of Wiener Neustadt and devastated the countryside around the town, torturing and eating civilians regardless of their age, sex, fortune, or class. And according to Frenchman Ivo of Narbonne, who was in the town at the time, their soldiers ate old and deformed women right away, while virgin girls and beautiful women were gang raped to death and then eaten. Their breasts were cut off and served to the Mongol leaders as special delicacies. On the 21st of July, 1514, the captured Hungarian rebel leader, Yorgi Doza, was condemned to sit on a smoldering heated iron throne and forced to wear a heated iron crown and scepter, mocking his ambition to be king. While he was suffering, a procession of 9 fellow rebels, who had been starved beforehand, were led to the throne. Next, executioners removed some pliers from a fire and forced them onto Dorza's skin. After tearing his flesh, the remaining rebels were ordered to bite spots where the hot pliers had been inserted and to swallow the flesh. The 3 or 4 who refused were simply cut up, promoting the others to comply. In the end, Doza died from the ordeal, while the rebels who obeyed were released. From the 16th century on, an unusual form of medical cannibalism became widespread in several European countries, for which thousands of Egyptian mummies were ground up and sold as medicine. Powdered human mummy, called mummia, was thought to stop internal bleeding and have some healing properties. Practice developed into a widespread business that flourished until the early 18th century. The demand was much higher than the supply of ancient mummies, leading to much of the offered mummia being counterfeit, made from recent Egyptian or European corpses, often from the gallows instead. In a few cases, mummia was still offered in medical catalogs in the early 20th century. In colonial Jamestown, Virginia, United States colonists resorted to cannibalism during a period from 1609 to 1610 known as the Starving Time. After food supplies had diminished, some colonists began to dig up corpses for food. During this period, one man was tortured until he confessed to having killed, salted, and eaten his pregnant wife. He was burned alive as punishment. In an 1809 incident known as the Boyd Massacre, about 66 passengers and crew of the Boyd were killed and eaten by Maori on the Wangara Peninsula in the north of New Zealand. Following the French invasion of Russia in 1812, the ill-fated retreat saw some of the Napoleon soldiers resort to cannibalism when facing starvation in the Russian winter. The Essex was sunk by a sperm whale in the Pacific Ocean in 1820. Most survivors of Captain Pollard's ship spent 90 days in small whaling boats before being rescued. 7 of the members who died during the 90 days were documented to have been eaten, some after they died. 2 others who were sacrificed for that purpose after drawing lots. One of the small boats was found containing 2 survivors, sucking on the marrow of a human bone. The tale of the Essex actually is what inspired Herman Melville to write his novel Moby Dick. In Germany, Fritz Haarmann, also called the Butcher of Hanover, sexually assaulted and murdered at least 24 boys, most of them teenagers between 1918 and 1924. He regularly sold boneless ground meat on the black market and gave different and contradictory explanations about the origin of this meat. Suspicions that this was his way of getting rid of some of the mortal remains of his victims were never definitively confirmed nor refuted. Before 1931, New York Times reporter William Seabrook allegedly, in the interest of research, obtained from a hospital intern at the Sorbonne a chunk of human meat from the body of a wealthy man killed in an accident, then cooked and ate it. He reported, "It was like good, fully developed veal, not young, but not yet beef. It was very definitively like that, and it was not like any other meat I had ever tasted. It was not nearly like good, fully developed veal that I think no person with a palate of ordinary, normal sensitiveness could distinguish it from veal. It was mild, good meat with no other sharply defined or highly characteristic taste, such as, for instance, goat, high game, or pork calf. The rump steak was slightly tougher than prime veal, a little springy, but not too tough or stringy to be agreeably edible. The loin roast, from which I cut and ate a central slice, was tender, and in color, texture, and smell, as well as taste, strengthened my certainty that of all the meats we habitually know, veal is the one meat in which this meat is accurately comparable. Then, as one final example, members of a Satanist youth gang killed 4 teenagers, 3 girls and a boy, in satanic rituals in the Russian Yaroslavl region in 2008. After killing their victims, they beheaded the corpses, ate their tongues, breasts, and hearts, and had sex with their corpses. Nikolai Ogolobiak, don't know if I pronounced that right or not, who had been an adult at the time of the murders, was sentenced to 20 years in a penal colony. Several minors, who had also been involved, received sentences of 8 to 10 years, or were sent to mental institutions. However, in 2023, Nikolai was pardoned after having volunteered to fight in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So, yeah, I could go on for quite a while longer, but I think you more than get a point by now. There's been a lot of incidents of cannibalism, some out of a primal need to survive a cruel condition, some out of a ritualistic sacrifice, or just straight up murder by evil people. All of them quite disgusting though. Unit 731. And for the final entry this tier, we have, well, one of the worst entries on this entire iceberg. For the sheer amount of atrocities against humanity this facility caused. Quote, Unit 731, short for Manchu Department 731, and also known as the Kamo Detachment 198, and the Ishi Unit, was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army that engaged in lethal human experimentation and biological weapons manufacturing during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. Estimates vary as to how many were killed between 1936 to 1945. Roughly 14,000 victims were murdered in Unit 731. It is estimated that at least 300,000 individuals have died due to infectious illnesses caused by the activities of Unit 731 and its affiliated research facilities. Established in 1936, Unit 731 was responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes which were committed by the Japanese armed forces. It routinely conducted tests on people who were dehumanized and internally referred to as logs. Experiments included disease injections, controlled dehydration, biological weapon testing, hyperbaric pressure chamber testing, vivisections, organ harvesting, amputation, and standard weapon testing. Victims included not only kidnapped men, women, including pregnant women and children, but also babies born from the systemic rape perpetuated by the staff inside the compound. The victims also came from different nationalities, with the majority being Chinese and a significant minority being Russian. Additionally, Unit 731 produced biological weapons that were used in areas of China not occupied by Japanese forces, which included Chinese cities and towns, water sources, and fields. Estimates of those killed by Unit 731 and its related program range up to 500,000 people, and none of the inmates survived. During the end of the war, all prisoners were killed to conceal evidence. Originally set up by the military police of the Empire of Japan, Unit 731 was taken over and commanded until the end of the war by General Shiro Ishii, a combat medic officer. The facility itself was built in 1935 as a replacement to the Zogma Fortress, a prison and experimentation camp. Ishii and his team used it to expand their capabilities. The program received generous support from the Japanese government until the end of the war in 1945. And on August 28, 2002, Tokyo District Court ruled that Japan had committed biological warfare in China, and consequently was responsible for the deaths of many residents. Both the Soviet Union and United States gathered data from the unit after the fall of Japan, while 12 Unit 731 researchers arrested by Soviet forces were tried at the December 1949 Khabarovsk war crimes trials. They were sentenced lightly to the Siberian labor camp from 2 to 25 years, in exchange for the information that they held. Those captured by the US military were secretly given immunity. The United States helped cover up the human experimentations and handed stipends to the perpetrators. The US had co-opted the researchers' bioweapons information and experience for use in their own warfare program, resembling Operation Paperclip. So did the Soviet Union in building their bioweapons facility, using documentation captured from the unit in Manchuria." Unquote. Yeah, this one has it all. Terrible crimes against humanity and suffering of innocents done by a totalitarian government. Oh, and government corruption by two other governments right after its downfall. It's all rather sickening, made all the worse when one reads into the details of some of the experiments that went on in Unit 731. I won't go through all the details as it's quite, honestly, extremely extensive. But as noted earlier, there were live vivisections, which means they just straight up strap people down to a table and cut them open without any anesthesia, start pulling out their organs, and yeah, that's how that went. And they did the same thing to babies as well. They were also constantly injecting the prisoners with different types of poisons and biological diseases, such as gonorrhea for example, and then cutting them open to see what happened as they are already suffering and dying from it. And Army engineer Hisato Yoshimura conducted experiments by taking captives outside, dipping various appendages in water of various temperatures and allowing the limb to freeze. Then once frozen, Yoshimura would strike their affected limbs with a short stick, emitting a sound resembling that which a board gives when it is struck. Ice was then chipped away, with the affected area being subjected to various treatments. Military personnel of the unit referred to Yoshimura as a scientific devil and a cold-blooded animal due to his strictness and involvement in mass killings and inhumane scientific tests, which included soaking the fingers of a 3-year-old child in water containing ice and salt. And as noted earlier, after Japan was defeated in World War II, none of these people ever got the chance for freedom, as on August 11th and 12th, after the end of the war, approximately 300 prisoners were disposed of. The prisoners were coerced into yasus by being given a piece of rope. 1/4 of them hung themselves, and the remaining 3/4 who would not consent to yasus were made to drink potassium cyanide and killed by injection. In the end, all were taken care of. The prisoners were made to drink potassium cyanide by mixing it with water and putting it into bowls. The injections were probably chloroform. I could go on, but I think you more than get the point. Truly awful, disgusting shit. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all so very much for watching the 4th part of the disturbing Wikipedia Iceberg. The next part will be the finale, and that last tier is pretty short. There's only a few entries on it, so sort of like this one where it was more than mostly bonus entries, the last one will also be mostly bonus entries, along with, of course, the last several very disturbing entries. So again, if you happen to have any additional entries you would like me to include, whether they be creepy, obscure, weird, funny, interesting, it doesn't matter, send me it via an Instagram or a Twitter DM, and I will see about including it. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all of my loyal patrons and channel members for helping to support me and the channel as always, including all of my night eggs and my night owlets, as well as a very special thank you to all of my great night owls, including Sketch Lombo, Sombre Devante 06, Jeffrey Robbery, Hex Miniacana, and Ho Hot, as well as a very special thank you to all of my arch owls, including the wise Nicodemus, the talented Cherry and GT, the always Chi Vibes Zen Garden Party, the daring Daniel Petrie, the Super Saiyan Star Punch Gaming, the mysterious Mr. Gaming Sheep, the fearless Forgotten Ace, and the Supersonic Sword. Thank you all so very much for watching, and until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.